Hello and welcome to episode 590 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always joined by Evan Silva. And today we have a very, very special guest. You know him as the industry's premier offensive line evaluator. He's out there rubbing elbows with tons of current and former offensive linemen. It is one of the oldest friends of the show, Brandon Thorn of both ETR and Trench Warfare. Brandon, how's it going today, buddy?
Doing good, guys. Happy to be here. Excited for another season. And yeah, man, this is awesome. I'm stoked to be here.
Stoked to have you. Evan, how's it going today?
It's going great. I think that people, especially in our world, the fantasy football community, tend to think of offensive line as sort of like a sort of niche analysis. And, that's certainly not the way that it's thought of by, quote unquote, real football people. Just think about the basics. Like there's 5 offensive linemen, sometimes 6 if you're counting like a blocking tight end. There are 11 players on an offensive unit. That's almost half or more than half of the players out there on the field for that offensive unit. So this is always a treat to get to listen to Brandon Thorn talk about offensive line play and what teams have improved, what teams have declined, and who are going to be the real needle movers at the top and the bottom of Brandon Thorn's rankings. Who really matter, which offensive lines really matter.
I think 2 of the biggest hits last year were being really high on Eagles offense and being really high on Lions offense. And a big part that gave us confidence, I think, to be really high on both of those offenses was offensive line play. In this year's rankings, Eagles and Lions are very, very, very high. As I mentioned, Thorn's offensive line rankings for the 2023 season are out. He ranks each unit 1 through 32, projects their starters, gives notes on why he has that offensive line ranked where he does. If you want to read the full article, it is part of our draft kit, which also includes all our rankings, Silva's top 150, tons more. Head to the subscribe tab on EstablishTheRun.com for more details there. We also just launched the camp news tracker. Be sure to check that out. Keep up with all the training camp news. We distill down to what's actually important. Lastly, our friends at Underdog are offering a deposit bonus up to $100 for new users. Just use promo code ETR at UnderdogFantasy.com. That's promo code ETR at UnderdogFantasy.com. All right. I want to start with units that I wasn't expecting to see so high. So I love when Brandon sends us the ranking because I love just looking through and being like, oh, wow, I didn't think that. I did not expect that. And, I think I have some handle on what units are good and which aren't, but I certainly am not as deep as Brandon. The first one that caught my eye, Brandon, I was not expecting to see so high, was the Los Angeles Chargers. You have their offensive line 5th overall. This offense, man, Kellen Moore, Justin Herbert, awesome wideout core, Austin Eckler, and now the number 5 offensive line. I'm starting to get a tingling feeling, Brandon. Talk to me about the Chargers offensive line and why you have them so high.
Well, I think first it's important to just point out some context of kind of where they're ranked and like the tiers, and that's why I love doing tiers. So they're in tier 3, even though they're 5th overall. I see there's, at least 2 tiers, before them of offensive lines. So with that being said, like tier 3 is 5 to 16, I want to say. So all those teams are somewhat interchangeable, but, granted they are at the top of the tier. So I think that they have, a pretty good chance of at least climbing into the next one. But that said, I still think tier 3 for us is solid, or in that range. The fact is there just aren't, 15 above average offensive lines in the NFL. So, even though they're 5th, I think people should also understand that I don't expect them to be elite or very good, but I do think that they'll be good. So that's, kind of first off there. And then some more kind of background information on their offensive line. They're very young, just overall. I think they're the 7th youngest in the NFL. And they're very cheap, because of that. They're the 28th. They rank 28th in cap spending, I think. So they're young, cheap. And I think they're going to be much improved because Rashawn Slater's coming back. I don't know. It seems like there's maybe that is probably the biggest thing that's being underrated out there. The fact that they're getting, in my opinion, a top 5 left tackle back in the lineup. That's going to be huge. So I think they're going to be much better there. The offense is going to be able to be more opened up, especially in the passing game, because you don't have to account for a 6th-round rookie left tackle and pass protection. Granted, he performed admirably in that position. Jamari Sawyer is playing right guard this year. So that's going to be better. And then also I think the guard position in general is going to be better because last year left guard Matt Filer wasn't very good. Zion Johnson is moving to left guard, who was a first-round pick. I'm very high on him. I think Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson could be one of the 5 or 6 best left sides in football this year. And then you got Corey Linsley at center. So that trio, I think, is going to be really good. And that's kind of the foundation of the line. And then the right side, there's more high variance there. That's what could kind of sink them this year with Jamari Sawyer and Trey Pipkins. Pipkins is coming off a good year, first year as a full-time starter. So that's kind of what adds some variance in here. But that trio, and I think the upside, the system, like you mentioned, the quarterback, I think all those things work in their favor. So I feel pretty good about putting them at the top of tier 3 because of those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, Kellen Moore certainly, Evan, got really good offensive line play out of the Cowboys for much of his tenure there as well. Have to feel pretty good about Chargers offense right now.
Yeah. I mean, chips are in on the Chargers this year, with the coordinator upgrade. I just like the upside of this unit. The return of Rashawn Slater at left tackle theoretically should improve 2 positions. They get better at left tackle. And then for how well Jamari Sawyer played at left tackle, I feel like he was kind of always projected coming out of Georgia to be a guard. Mm-hmm. That a lot of people thought that was going to be his best position. Now he's playing that, and he's starting at right guard. What stands out to me is that, and Thorn pointed out that the Chargers are not investing a ton of money into this offensive line, but they've invested a ton of high picks into this offensive line. Rashawn Slater was a first-round pick. Zion Johnson was a first-round pick. Trey Pipkins at right tackle was a 3rd-round pick, and then they signed Corey Linsley to a sizable deal. What about Trey Pipkins? What are your thoughts on him? Because I've seen, I don't know, I feel like he's a polarizing player. Some people like him, some people don't.
I mean, he wasn't very good before last year. Last year he was a fill-in guy before that as well. Last year was the first year that he started more than like 7 or 8 games or something. He started, I think, 16. So last year, I think, is kind of his new floor. I would look at it that way. And last year he was, below average, adequate, functional, kind of, like he's their 5th best starter. But there's offensive lines out there with, much worse 5th starters than that. Especially based on what he did last year. He's young. You have to keep in mind his background. He came out of like Sioux Falls College, very small school. It took him a while, to kind of get there. But yeah, so that's kind of his background. He's still young. I think the best way to frame it is last year is kind of how I'm looking at his floor now. I don't necessarily see a super high ceiling or anything like that. I don't think he's going to be much better, but I think that's probably the middle ground or floor of what we're looking at moving forward. So that's how I see him.
All right. Second unit that I was not expecting to see so high was the Seattle Seahawks. In that same tier as the Chargers, Brandon has them 9th overall. This has been a controversial one. Other people do not think as highly as Brandon does of the Seahawks offensive line. I was happy to see it because Evan and I have talked a lot about being in on Geno, being in on Kenneth Walker, being in on DK Metcalf and JSN and Lockett. And so we need offensive line to play well here. I'm curious, Brandon, why you think maybe other people aren't as high as you on the Seahawks offensive line, and any more thoughts on them?
I mean, I think probably because the uncertainty at 2 positions, center and right guard, it's a 4-man race between those 2 spots right now. So the way that I look at those 2 spots is I'm expecting a below average starter and an average starter to come out of that. I more so see the average starter coming at center. I think Evan Brown last year was kind of an okay fill-in for Detroit. He played, he's like a guard center swing guy. He could win that job and be okay. I kind of think Olu Oluwatimi, the rookie 5th-round pick, has a chance to win that job, and I would honestly pick him to win that job. He's a 5th-round pick because he's a little small and he's not very athletic, but he's like one of the most decorated college centers ever. He won the Remington Award for the best center in the country. He was the captain of the Joe Moore Award winning Michigan offensive line, best offensive line in the country. So he's one of those intangible guys, hard worker, great teammate, all that. He kind of has what it takes, I think, to earn a starting job as a rookie and be okay. I'm not expecting him to, light the world on fire or anything, but if he's their fourth best starter, and he's, average, that's kind of where I'm going with that position. That's kind of how I see that. And then right guard is going to be between 2 fourth-round picks. Phil Haynes, who's been there for several years. He signed a 1-year extension. I think he's probably going to get the job. And I really like a rookie that they got there from LSU, Anthony Bradford, who maybe if Haynes doesn't work out, Bradford can step in.
Just a massive dude.
Yeah, they're both big dudes.
Yeah.
Yep. So I just see that's going to probably be their 5th best starter. And I think there's some upside there to be okay, and I think, kind of a fair assessment is like a below average and average starter there. And that's kind of how I see those two positions playing out. Now, one of them could tank and be like a black eye and a terrible, that's in the range of outcomes. I wouldn't bet on that though. And then you have to look at, of course, what they did last year in the draft, hitting 2 long-term tackle starters in the draft and Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. I think those guys are going to be at least as good as they were last year, expectedly better. And then Damian Lewis, I think, is a little bit better than people are giving him credit for. I think he's a solid starter. So, again, a tier 3 offensive line, kind of in the middle of tier 3, but I really like a lot of what they have going on here. And I think it catches people by surprise as well, because they're spending the least amount of money in the league at the position. This is the youngest unit in the league, tied with the Giants for the youngest. And but they're also very athletic if you look at relative athletic score. So there's just a lot to like. I think the arrow's pointed up for them.
The upside on these second-year tackles, I mean, people around the NFL say that players generally tend to make their biggest leap from year 1 to year 2, and I think I would agree with that. Charles Cross and Abe Lucas,
they were good last year.
Right, and they were already good.
Yeah.
So are they going to get even better? Gino's a little shaky under pressure at times, so he needs that. I think having those bookend tackles is a real plus, and I love seeing how high that you had them have this offensive line ranked, because like Adam said, we're really high on the Seahawks offense as a unit this year.
All right. Let's go to some units that when I was reading Brandon's, I was like, man, I didn't think that they were that bad. I want to start with the Colts, because historically Colts, I feel like offensive line has been a strength. And also so many people are saying, oh, well, they have Anthony Richardson. He's the new Jalen Hurts. And then they've been Shane Steichen, and they're just going to run the Eagles scheme. If you don't have good offensive line play, it's really hard to do what the Eagles did and executed on last year. Eagles league best offensive line. Brandon this year has the Colts 24th. That's a concern for me for Anthony Richardson. Brandon, how bad is this Colts unit?
I don't think they're that bad, honestly. I mean, 24, tier 4, unit. So not tier 5 or tier 6. That's kind of, those are the, quote unquote, bad ones that you could say, but, they're towards the bottom of tier 4 as well. But the reason for me having them there is because they didn't upgrade the position, for one, from last year. They're just expecting guys to get better. And I think that's fair at left tackle. Bernard Raymond is a guy I like coming out. He certainly has to get stronger though. And I think the quarterback is going to help mitigate, a lot of this. So I'm trying to sort of isolate the offensive line rankings from the quarterback. And that I think can help make sense for some people, even though they're, tied together and they play off of each other. I'm trying to separate it and just look at that. But Anthony Richardson, based on his ability to not take sacks in college and being the most athletic quarterback of all time, he's certainly going to make this offensive line look better than they are, I think. So that's Raymond. And then also right guard Will Fries. That's the one that I'm really concerned about. I actually kind of liked Fries coming out, but he's a 7th round pick. I had him graded as a 7th round pick. I looked at him as a quality backup. The fact that he's probably going to be the guy there. He was the guy last year too, at least for a chunk of the season, and it didn't go well at all. That could be sort of, in the offensive line world, people say if there's one like really obvious weak link that could tank the unit. And I think Fries has the potential to be that guy this year. Now, I think the scheme will probably be a little bit run focused, play action focused. They'll hide him, but if they're in close games, against good opponents, obvious pass situations, I think that this can fall apart pretty quickly. If this was a run blocking ranking, they'd be higher. But this is a pass focused ranking. So that's why I have them where I do.
Yeah. I've struggled with Colts stuff, Evan. I like Jonathan Taylor when he falls late into round 2. But I have not taken hardly any Michael Pittman or any of their other pass catchers really at all.
Yeah. The Colts team preview was the last team preview that I did. And I came away from the team preview being, I would say, and I went in somewhat skeptical about the Colts, and I came out more skeptical about really wanting to draft any of them, even Jonathan Taylor, because I don't think he's going to catch many passes like at all. His receiving projection is almost non-existent. And then as Thorn alluded to, potentially 2 huge holes on the offensive line. It sounds like he's more upbeat on Raymond in his second season. I was thinking that Blake Freeland, who they drafted in the 4th round, and again, this is the extent of the upgrades that they made on their offensive line, which wasn't good last year. Was a 4th round pick. I was thinking that he might actually challenge Raymond at some point. They should have 3 good starters. I mean, if not 3 really good starters. But Ryan Kelly, I feel like, has been more inconsistent in recent seasons. Quentin Nelson is probably going to be fine, but he's not coming off his best year. I think it was due to injuries. He somehow played every snap, even though he was hurt all last year, wasn't he? Somehow played every single snap. What a badass. And then Braden Smith should be a quality starter, right?
Yeah, I think those 3 are reliable. Yeah, they're at least going to be above average, if not better. But there are injury concerns there, especially with Kelly. But yeah, I do think they still have the big 3 in place. This is the 2nd most athletic line in the league per, RAS, relative athletic score again. So, but that's how the Colts draft. They just draft athletes everywhere, which isn't necessarily indicative of great offensive line play. But, there's some upside there for them to do well in, certain systems and being asked to do certain things. But yeah, again, I just keep coming back. Before I go higher than them, especially with the pass focused ranking, I have to see, the first 3-4 weeks, and let's see how Will Fries does. Let's see how they're scheming this thing up. Let's see how Richardson plays, and then I also want to see Raymond. So there's question marks there that, outside of those big 3 that I need to see first, I think.
Brandon mentioned during the season, note for in-season subscribers, and by the way, the bundle is available now, bundling draft kit and in-season. For in-season subscribers, each week, Brandon ranks every offensive line, updated, what he's seen, injuries, et cetera, and identifies the biggest mismatches of each week. Again, that's in the in-season package. Let's keep it moving here with units I was not expecting to see so low. A lot of people are talking about the Titans now since they got DeAndre Hopkins. I was a little surprised to see them come in DFL, dead last, 32nd overall in your rankings. I know you like Peter Skoronski, the rookie that they took. Dead last, though, is a concern, I think. What do you think about Titans' offensive line, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of the unquestioned dead last one for me. I just, Peter Skoronski, I do like a lot, but he's their best player and he hasn't played a snap. I mean, that just kind of says it all right there. I mean, everybody else is just unknown, or we know they aren't good and they're counting on them all of a sudden being good. AKA Andre Dillard. The fact that they signed Andre Dillard and are putting him, what looks to be at the starting left tackle spot after he couldn't develop under the best developer of talent in the league in Jeff Stoutland. I don't know what makes them think he's just going to be good now. He just left the literal best coach in the game. So that's a stretch. Maybe Skoronski plays left. I have him in at left guard right now, but maybe, I think he'd be better at left tackle than Dillard. So there's uncertainty there. Their second best player is probably Daniel Brunskill, who was the 5th best player on the 49ers. Brunskill's like a fine, guy to have as like a swing backup kind of guy. But like, if he's your number 2, man, I mean,
And he was playing guard in San Francisco, and they're going to start him at right tackle now.
I have him at right guard because they just worked out George Fant. I think they might sign him to play right tackle because Nicholas Petit-Frere is suspended for 6 games. He's the right tackle, the rookie from Ohio State last year. So that's his job. But in the interim, Fant might be that guy. So we'll see. Right now, I have Jalen Duncan or DeMarco Jones.
So we're already talking about them signing guys off the street to be a starter on the offensive line.
Yes.
I mean, this is real bad.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. They're not spending a lot on the position, which doesn't necessarily equate to a bad offensive line, but in this case, I think it does. This is the second least experienced offensive line in the league. They have 90 combined starts between them. It's just kind of an odd situation considering, that they have Tannehill, they have Henry, they sign Hopkins, and they have, it looks like everything around the offensive line's looking to compete. But they're going to have to win in spite of the offensive line, in my opinion, based on what we see right now.
Yeah. Evan and I talked yesterday about Ryan Tannehill in 2QB and best ball formats. I still am in on him, but this certainly gives me a little bit of pause.
Yeah.
All right. I want to hit on a few that there's narratives around. Steelers, the narrative, Brandon, I don't know if you've heard this, is that the offensive line is much improved. Najee is going to get all this work. The offensive line is better. The scheme is going to be better. The team's going to be better. And it's a smash now. One of the holes in the argument is Brandon has the Steelers ranked 28th. So I assume you do not agree with this narrative that Steelers offensive line is significantly improved off last year.
Well, no, not necessarily. The interior is improved. I think the interior will be pretty good. Because they signed Nate Herbig, who I think is a fine backup who could potentially win the job from James Daniels. So it's him or James Daniels at right guard, Mason Cole probably at center. Herbig could play center. And then Isaac Seumalo is their big addition in free agency, at least. And I think he's probably their best player. He was the 5th best starter on the Eagles. Granted, it's the Eagles offensive line. But still, he's their best player now. So he goes from 5th best to 1st best. That, I think, speaks to kind of the state of the Steelers offensive line. The tackles are really what worry me. I think they're below average there, even though Dan Moore has gotten a little bit better the last couple of years. They drafted Broderick Jones in the 1st round. He's very raw, very young, extremely talented. I think he could work himself into being probably a good starter this season. I don't think that's crazy, but it's not even a slam dunk he's going to win the job from Dan Moore Jr. as of right now, just based on kind of, him only playing 1 year of college football and things like that.
Such a disappointment. I mean, they took him high. And I think it was Greg Cosell who also expressed a little bit of skepticism about Broderick Jones, that he didn't think that he should have been drafted that high.
I mean, in that draft class, I understand it because the tackle position, like the quality of it just fell off a cliff at some point, but, early. But yeah, I mean, it is high. I think the upside here, the optimistic view is he's kind of similar to Tyler Smith coming out of Tulsa last year, who went to Dallas and wound up, being good right away, who was also an inexperienced player, raw, young, but talented. So that's kind of the optimistic view. Maybe he could be like a Tyler Smith, but that's going to be asking a lot, I think. So again, if this was a run blocking grade, or run blocking slant, I would have them graded higher because I think the interior will be pretty good. They're all better run blockers and pass blockers. So from a rushing perspective, they'd get a little bit of a bump, but in like the drop back pass game and stuff, like I don't see, Isaac Seumalo is your best pass blocker. That's not probably going to be very good.
Yeah. I think that last point is notable for the Najee truthers out there. I've been a bit paralyzed on Najee. We talked about that on the Dead Zone podcast. You can go back and listen to that. A couple other units, Jets. Everybody seems to think like the linchpin. If the Jets offensive line is good, they're going to smash, and I get it. On paper, Jets have a lot of talent on both sides of the football. Brandon has Jets offensive line 17th, middle of the pack here. How do you think they can protect Aaron Rodgers, who is entering, I believe, his age 40 season, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, the Jets are one of the more interesting ones, honestly, to me. So, they're the most experienced offensive line in football by a large margin, which I wasn't expecting when I put together all these numbers. They have 457 combined starts. If you're talking about Connor McGovern winning the center spot, not Joe Tippmann, then obviously it would change a little bit. So they're the most experienced. They're like the third biggest, and they're the fifth most athletic. So like that just says to me, and I think the tape agrees, this is a very talented offensive line on paper. However, Mekhi Becton's played one game in 2 years. Dwayne Brown is the oldest offensive lineman in football. So injury concerns are massive at offensive tackle for them. If both those guys are healthy, this could be one of the best offensive lines in the league. But I kind of settled in middle of the pack just because of the uncertainty there with Becton and Brown lasting, for 10 or more games this season. We just have to see it, I think, before you could be that much more confident in this offensive line.
They just seem like such an extreme high variance unit. I mean,
I think they are, yeah.
They could be really good. They could be really bad. I mean, Dwayne Brown is getting up there. He reported to camp. He started 48. On PUP. Laken Tomlinson, I don't know. I never really know what to think of him because, I mean, he's bounced around. He was a really high pick. He's bounced around. It seems like the Shanahan people like him. And then he's played for several teams. Joe Tippmann's a rookie projected as their starting center. Elijah Vera-Tucker, I think he's a stud. And then Mekhi Becton is like a conundrum wrapped in an enigma. So I just came up with that, by the way. So, but apparently he reported to camp looking awesome.
Yeah,
Mekhi Becton.
Well, yeah, the thing with it, I know people in New Jersey, like they're always like on the lookout for Mekhi Becton because they want to see how much he weighs. They're like, oh, I saw Mekhi today. He's like 450 pounds, but no one knows.
Yeah, so it could go any which way.
By the way, Brandon's dog is in on the Jets offensive line. I heard him. He's in. Last one I want to hit on before I have a couple more questions for Brandon here is the Bears. Lot of talk about the Bears offensive line. Always. We talked a lot how we like what the Bears have done from a personnel perspective. I haven't fully gone #our Bears, but I'm close. However, one of the reasons that our Lions we were so confident in our Lions, like I mentioned at the top, offensive line play. Brandon has Bears offensive line 26th overall. How big of a concern do you think Bears OL is, Brandon?
Yeah, from a pass protection perspective, I'm obviously very concerned having them ranked 26th. If this was a run blocking grade, they'd be much higher, I think. Like this is probably the biggest, difference in run and pass blocking in how I see any offensive line because all their offensive linemen are pretty good run blockers. So I think in the run game, if they design this the right way and they keep, they open it up a little bit, for Fields, but this stays kind of like a Baltimore-esque type of system where they're utilizing Fields' legs, and things like that. This could be, a good offensive line. But I'm trying to isolate this, like, pass game, drop back pass game, high leverage situations, they're trying to get the ball downfield. I don't see how they're going to be, better than like a below average pass blocking unit. And, in fact, I'm going into the year thinking they're going to be, much worse than that. So I just think they're all much better run than pass blockers. I mean, the best pass blocker might be, maybe you're saying Darnell Wright, the rookie, might be their best pass blocker, but he's a way better run blocker. He has the talent to be a good pass blocker, but like, if that's the guy, that you're kind of counting on to go on an island, one-on-one against these edge rushers as a rookie, that's, I don't know, man. I think the run game will be fine, but the pass game is a totally different thing in Chicago.
I don't think it helps, Evan, that Justin Fields takes sacks. He had a 14.7% sack rate last year, which is mind-blowingly high. Like the next highest was Russell Wilson at 10.2%. It's certainly a concern for the pass game. I've been almost completely out on DJ Moore. I know Evan likes him a little bit more. than I do. But yeah, certainly some concerns on.
Well, he has a tendency to hold on to the ball too long, and that puts a lot of stress on the offensive line. I don't know. I've been more optimistic than Thorn about. I'm not a Bears fan. I want to clear. I actually kind of don't even like the Bears, but I've been more optimistic on this situation than Thorn has. So I'm just kind of hoping that Thorn is wrong. You got a chance. Have you ever met Braxton Jones?
I've seen him in person.
Okay. Yeah. We met him at a Cubs game where he threw out the first pitch, and then no one was around him. And then I was like, yo, Blair, that's my daughter, go up to him, try to get his autograph. And she went up there, and her little friend went up there, and they were like talking for like 15 minutes. And then I went up and I was like, all right, I gotta break this up. I don't want them to bother him. And I was like, I hope that they're not bothering you. And he was like, no, man, I'm from Utah. Like, no one ever comes up to me. He was like, this is a treat. And he was like the coolest guy. He gave him all the autographs and took pictures with him. And I don't know, he was such an awesome guy. So I do have that bias, and I'm like rooting for him. And I mean, he had a good rookie year, don't you think? At least certainly for a 5th round pick.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say he had a good rookie year. He's, I think he's a much better run blocker than pass blocker, though. He's a good run blocker. Don't get me wrong. He's strong. He's big. He's physical. That's how the whole offensive line is. They're big, strong, and physical. That's this offensive line.
Nate Davis is like the prototype of that, don't you think?
Yeah, and so is Tevin Jenkins, and so is Darnell Wright. I mean, Cody Whitehair is kind of the odd man out. He's like the small, zone center, who it's just kind of funny but he's surrounded by just mass everywhere.
Well, I feel like your analysis, Thorn, would support the notion that maybe the Bears aren't going to open it up in the passing game very much this year, and that they're going to continue to run the crap out of the ball. Obviously, that's what they did last year.
I think they should, based on the personnel. Yeah, I don't think there's any question. You should base this offense. This should be like a 60-40, 58, 46, whatever, 42, kind of split in run pass. Like that's how I see this going. And hopefully, Fields can pick his spots a little bit better and have guys, open more this year.
By the way, if Broderick Jones walked up to me, I would have absolutely no idea who he was. I mean, zero chance I would recognize him and tell my kid to get his autograph.
First of all, it's Braxton Jones.
Sorry.
Second of all, he threw out the opening pitch.
Oh, okay. So you identified him there.
Also, he's 6'7", 315 pounds. Okay. Yeah. So he would stand out. It doesn't matter who else is around.
All right. Before we get out of here, I wanted to get Brandon's thoughts on 2 things. Units that are much better than last year that we haven't talked about yet, and units that are much worse than last year. Let's start with better. Brandon, who do you have, or who do you think is the most improved unit off of last season, or units?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a couple of them already. Chargers, I think, are going to be, better than last year with Slater coming back. But I'm a little bit higher on the Falcons than last year. Last year they got a lot of hype, but man, you look at the film and what they're asked to do, or what they weren't asked to do. I mean, they're like one of the more unique offenses in the league. I mean, run heavy, play action heavy, and then personnel heavy. So like the offensive line just had, as easy of a job as you could possibly have for an offensive line last year, which was great. It made them look good, and they had some success, all that. I give them credit. But, in the pass game, high leverage type stuff and against certain, high quality rushers, I just didn't think they had the personnel to really hold up. And I still have a little bit of questions about right tackle Caleb McGarry, who's a much better run than pass blocker, kind of similar to Braxton Jones in that way. So some questions there. But their biggest weakness last year was left guard, and they drafted Matthew Bergeron, who I think is going to be a big upgrade. Just especially in the run game again, but also
I know Lance Zierlein really loves Bergeron too. Just called him like an ass kicker or something like that.
Yeah, he's a good player, man. He played left tackle. He's kicking into guard, so he has some pass protection skills, to bring with how big and physical he is. So I think Bergeron's really the key that's going to unlock the offensive line and allow them to be a fringe top 10 unit this year. So that's one. I think Houston is another, because last year they honestly had the worst center in the NFL. His name was Scott Quessenberry. It was bad. I mean, Dexter Lawrence had like 15 pressures on him. I mean, like he was just really bad. So they drafted 2 centers, and one of them in the second round, I believe, Juice Scruggs from Penn State. He's going to be their starter. I think he's going to be okay, but okay compared to what they had last year. Huge jump. So that's really the main thing. And then also they got Shaq Mason in a trade from the Bucs, who is one of the better right guards in football. That's another upgrade. They have they probably have the second best left tackle in football in Laremy Tunsil. You expect Kenyon Green, last year's first round pick, to get a little bit better. I have them 13 right now. I think this offensive line could be pretty good this season in the run and pass game. So, and then especially because they have a quarterback now who can make them look a little bit better. And, I just think that this offensive line is kind of matching the general trajectory of the franchise. It's just kind of like pointed up. I think the offensive line kind of fits right in there. So I'm pretty high on them.
Like to hear that for Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, I would be in on Pierce, this year for sure. Because
and Singletary. I think Singletary is goes so late, and he's at least like a veteran RB that I think should be on people's radar. I love to hear it on the Falcons, man. I have a ton of team bets on the Falcons this year, and I don't think that they're going to open up their offense off of last year. I think they're going to do a lot of things that Brandon talked about, but man, they're going to be efficient, I think, in the run game once again. All right. What about some units that are much worse than last year, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm looking. I mean, my bottom tier, all those units were pretty bad last year. The Cardinals, well, they weren't very good last year. They're just a mess. I'm trying to think if there's like a significant one. I'm a little concerned about Miami. Last year they were okay, I think, looking back at my rankings. Like, let me see, week 18 rankings last year, the end of the year, I had them 22nd, and now I have them 25th. So not, too much worse there, but right tackle and left guard right now are total mysteries. I just don't know. Liam Eichenberg played left guard last year. He was not good. They signed Isaiah Wynn, who played right tackle last year in New England. He wasn't good at right tackle. He's clearly better on the left. I heard he might play left guard, which is actually pretty interesting. If him and Armstead were the left side, that could be actually pretty good. But then right tackle could be Eichenberg, kick out there. Austin Jackson has been a massive disappointment. Maybe he's okay, but they just have 2 spots to me that are really concerning, and we need to see how that plays out before I can go any higher on them.
What do you think about the Raiders? Because on paper, to me, they look like they could be in big time trouble, and they might be an offensive line that actually gets worse from last year. What do you think about them?
Yeah, that's another one. Week 18 last year, I had them 23rd, and now they're 27th. But I think they dropped a tier for me as well. So I like the left side. I think that could be solid, not great. Colton Miller and Dylan Parham, last year's rookie. I think that'll be pretty solid. But the other 3 spots, especially in the pass game, just a lot of questions. Alex Bars, in that division, Chris Jones, obviously the defensive tackle for the Chiefs, just he kills people. But what he did to Alex Bars last year, it was like varsity versus JV. I mean, it was ridiculous. So the fact that they're rolling out Bars again in that division, I mean, they
Alex
have to
Bars
do something.
was with the Bears for a while, and I mean, he couldn't even make the Bears, and the Bears were not considered like a particularly good offensive line, at least heading into last season.
Yeah, he really struggled last year against Chris Jones. And, everybody struggles to an extent against Chris Jones, but it was, unplayable kind of levels last year. So he needs to get a lot better. Jermaine Illuminor from Texas A&M, he's been around. He's okay. He's a much better run blocker than pass blocker. So that right side, to have one guy is one thing, but to have a whole side, that is kind of concerning. That's more difficult to overcome. The center's okay. I think Andre James, he's like a physical tone setter guy who's not very good with his technique and things. And I just think in that division too, there's not like a great interior defensive line in that division, but Chris Jones is just going to be a major problem for them. And then outside of their division, there's really good defensive tackles that they're going to face that I think it's just going to be tough, man, for them to work around that. And then, Jimmy Garoppolo, I don't know that he's going to help that a whole lot. He's certainly not going to run much. So I'm just skeptical.
All right. We've said it all. We've said too much, actually. If you want Brandon's full breakdown of every NFL offensive line, head to EstablishTheRun.com. His full rankings are up there as part of the draft kit. Brandon, tell the people where they can find you if you'd like to be found.
Yeah, on Twitter, probably be the best spot. It's at Brandon Thorn NFL. And then trenchwarfare.substack.com is my newsletter. You can sign up for that and get a bunch of stuff I'm doing around offensive and defensive line. Those are the best spots.
Yep. And during the season, like I said, Brandon's work will be also on Establish the Run, weekly pass rush and pass protection rankings for each unit, as well as the biggest mismatches broken down in the trenches for each week. All right. Appreciate Brandon's time. As always, be sure you are following at Adam Levitan, at Evan Silva, at Establish the Run on Twitter. Reminder, there is content on our YouTube channel that does not hit the podcast feed. Be sure to subscribe there on YouTube so you don't miss anything. For Brandon, for Evan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.